We are live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our ISE Fireside webinar. We have a great program today, and our topic is Security 2.0, Planning 2020 and Beyond in a Remote Workforce World. I want to say a special thank you to Code 42 for being our sponsor today. We really do appreciate our partnership with them. Let's go jump into our agenda because we've got a few things to cover and a great program planned. First and foremost, we'll be starting off, of course, with our webinar, and then we'll head into our panelist introductions. From there, we'll have our sponsor, Code 42, and their opening remarks and sharing all the great things that they're doing. Then we'll dive into a wonderful panel discussion with a myriad of topics. And then we'd love to hear from you with a Q&A session. So do ask some questions as you're thinking about them. You can pop them in the Q&A window and we'll take care of those answering those questions, as I say, at 2:35, and then we'll sign off at 2:45. For those that have CPE credits or need CPE credits, we definitely will award you one, but you will need to complete the program in its completion. So at the end of the webinar, please fill out the survey when it does appear, and there will be a space to insert your CPE number. And then we'll be able to send you some record of your attendance so you can submit your credits. So don't exit the webinar early or you'll miss out on the opportunity to get your CPE credits. And let's go ahead and jump into our panelist introductions. Frank, how about you? Would you be so kind to introduce yourself and share a little bit about yourself? And thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon. This is Frank Aiello. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Maximus. I'm located in the Northern Virginia area. I've been with Maximus, I think, coming up at about 22 months now. And then prior to that, I was the Chief Information Security Officer for the American Red Cross.
Well, thanks, Frank. We again appreciate you joining us today. Cindy, would you be so kind to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Cindy Cullen. I've been at IPG Interpublic Group for about 18 months now. And prior to that, I have 25 years experience in information security across telecom, pharma, financials, vendors, consulting, and now media.
Well, thanks, Cindy. We appreciate you joining us and sharing your knowledge today. And JD, would you be so kind to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm JD Hansen. I am the CISO at Code 42. I've been with the company for about 4 years and have spent about 15 years in the security space.
JD, would you tell us a little bit about Code 42 and all the cool things that you guys do?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Code 42, a little bit about us. We're a software development company. We're specialized in security software. Very basic description of what we're up to. We have software that sits on endpoints. So whether it's Mac, Windows, or Linux, it collects all file data that's generated on that endpoint. And then it monitors for all data exfiltration locations. So whether files are moving to USB, they're uploaded to Dropbox, they're emailed to someone, or they're shared just via cloud locations. And then what it does is just alerts the security team when exfiltration takes place. And I know probably what everybody's thinking. It sounds a lot like DLP, and DLP is really hard. I totally get that. I'm a practitioner. I've spent years trying to make DLP work for me, so I completely understand. The different thing that we're up to that we're trying really hard to do is monitor for all file exfiltration and all exfiltration types. So we're not requiring kind of the robust policies, the complex policies of the past that most likely come with DLP. Again, we're focused on kind of that employee life cycle, so tracking all data movement throughout. My team actually leverages the Code 42 solution internally on a daily basis. We found it to have been incredibly helpful for us, not only to make sure we don't have malicious exfiltration within our environment, but we also run into a lot of cases where on a regular basis, we just have a lot of users that unknowingly put data at risk, and our Code 42 product kind of helps identify that and allows us to have the visibility so that we can follow up with the person in a very assumed positive intent nature. So that's what we're up to at Code 42. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Marcy and Frank and Cindy for also sharing their knowledge.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. How about we jump into our discussions now? Does that sound good? All right. Our first topic is going to be, is your incident response plan prepared for insider threats? And as we know, security teams are working closely with legal and other enterprise teams to respond to incidents, but some of the efforts to coordinate together have become harder now because of the unstructured data, like customer lists and source code are really some of our organization's most valuable types of information. Now, employees certainly have access to this type of data and are really can be unknowingly or knowingly simultaneously the greatest threat. But, we have seen with the Ponemon study out there that insider threats actually account for half of all data loss incidents. And recently a Forrester study also kind of emphasized and reinforced that point, where they found that 90% of the insider threats are going undetected. That's a pretty hefty set of numbers. So I would say that I would be concerned certainly about the different tools out there, and now that we're working remotely. Cindy, I'm going to start with you. With your shift to going to we're working remotely in a hybrid type of environment, has this changed your approach at all to insider threats and incident response?
Well, to some extent, I think every organization has to change a little bit because of the different model. And so from our perspective, we were actually fairly well positioned when COVID came along, because we were actually we're an international company that has offices in China, and so we were impacted initially in China, and that gave us time to roll out remote access and collaboration tools, and we're able to prepare in the EU and the Americas. And we also had the infrastructure in place based on previous local disasters. Like here in the Northeast, we had a Hurricane Sandy, and in that space, I personally was out of with no electricity for two weeks, and wow. So the organization really got used to, had really seen dramatic issues with being able to get to the office. We weren't able to leave our development for 3 or 4 days because of the level of the roads were closed and such. And so luckily we had these issues, we had seen them in the past, and so we were in the process of developing VPN solutions and options that we were able to leverage in this environment. Additionally, we were in the process of moving to much more the software as a service model with O365, and so both of those require a slightly different model for insider threat. So we were well positioned to go forward in addressing the insider threat and the incident response, incident management based on the not requiring VPN access because of the O365. And then we also had the model for many of our employees to work from home a couple of days a week. So we had been able to stress test that infrastructure from that perspective as well.
So you were already working a couple of days a week from home. So as you mentioned, so that really helped you kind of test the waters for a full-fledged work from home environment. Is that what you're saying, Sid?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. And so then it was really a matter of ramping it up for the whole company to be able to manage work from home on a full-time basis.
So Frank, what about you? How have you, in your security team focused on protecting unstructured data and are achieving, if you are, security visibility into your data? And have you found any challenges along the way, especially now that we're working remotely in a little bit of a different work environment?
Mm-hmm. So Maximus, most of our customers are government customers at the federal and state level. We provide health and human services programs. So our data is largely citizen private data, PII or PHI. So of course, that's a big concern for us. We have to put a lot of controls around that. We were actually in the middle of a transformation. I think when I did my introduction, I mentioned I've been here about 22 months. Our CIO has been here 21 months and 3 weeks. He came in a week after I did. And so both of us are undergoing pretty significant transformations. From a technology side, we've been moving more to the cloud. We're a little bit farther behind a lot of organizations from that standpoint, bringing up to speed some aging technologies. And from the security side, looking at how we put better controls in place and improve our protection of that data. So I think we were a little behind. And I think one good thing, though, is on our roadmap, we, as part of the COVID-19 response and our move to get tens of thousands of our employees out to telework, we had to expedite a lot of the roadmap items that we had. So just simple things like desktop encryption. Now, we have deployed desktop encryption for all of our laptops. Before we left any of the desktops leave site, we had to make sure that all of the desktops were encrypted. USB port blocking. So it has shifted a lot of our strategy from, looking at how do we secure the data when it all resides in the data center, when 90 or plus % of our employees are all located working from an office, to now this new telework approach. One of the other things that we did, we relied very heavily on virtual desktop and desktop as a service. We were just in the process of moving from our on-premise data center-based virtual desktop and shifting that to a cloud solution. And we found that was very helpful. And really, we ended up now, I think we went from about 2,000 virtual desktops to about 15,000 within a few weeks to support BYOD, which was also something else that we had looked at supporting on a small scale, but never on the scale that we looked at today. So as far as some of the additional things we're working on, we are in the middle actually of a data loss prevention deployment. That actually started prior to COVID-19 and slowed down a little bit, but now we're in the process of implementing policies. And then we're continuing to look to the future. Our next stage is looking at user behavioral analysis as part of our next step in preventing insider threat. And then lastly, just looking at moving more controls from the edge and moving them to the endpoint devices, so we have better control around what our users are doing, whether they're sitting in the offices or working from home.
Thanks, Frank. I want to shift gears a little bit to JD and kind of give us sort of a 30,000 feet across your client base. I know you guys have a lot of clients. What do you think, data exfiltration is having effects on your clients and across the different businesses? And how do you think one should detect and prevent data from leaving an organization?
Yeah, so if you hear a loud dog behind me, I'm going to apologize in advance.
I'm on my earbuds, so fortunately you're not going to have a course from that.
Yeah,
that's okay. Parts of working from home, you have pets.
We do. Yeah, so for us, like data exfiltration for our customers, whether it comes from an external threat or it's insider threat, it's still data exfiltration. It's still a data breach. And as many people know listening, I mean, that can have all sorts of implications across a company, whether it's financial or reputational impact or even strategic impact. And so, for us, like our customers are very much thinking about, data loss in the same vein that they're thinking about, a breach of some sort. We're seeing that a lot of companies, given the situation that we're in right now with COVID-19, are very much focused on insider threats just because the nature of the increased risk. So if you think of prior to COVID-19, everybody was in the office. things were okay. You had the extra sort of monitoring of what's going on in the network. You also had kind of a little bit of an accountability thing where you're around other people. Data loss and mistakes might not be as prevalent as they are now. Fast forward now, I mean, you have lots of individuals who are nervous for their jobs and employment. You have lots of individuals that are just anxious. You have people that may be at a higher risk of either maliciously taking data or making mistakes at home. And so this tends to be a big focal point for all of our customers right now.
Well, I think you bring up a good point and a perfect segue, JD, for our next topic, which is data risks with onboarding and offboarding of the remote workforce. Since mid-March, over 33 million people in the U.S. have filed for unemployment benefits, and such a change of uncertainty, as you mentioned, in fear and changes rapidly happening around us. A lot of folks out there aren't sure, if the companies are going to be having them on board. But in the same token, I have seen people getting hired, and it's kind of been interesting where they haven't met their team in person, but doing their interview process, for example, completely remotely, like on a Zoom call. So when we're boarding folks too, security might be overlooked in a situation right now because our normal processes are not in place. And, we don't have necessarily all the tools in place to either board or off board folks. So JD, because you started, with this topic in your last comment, tell us a little bit your thoughts on how this shift to remote hybrid environment is changing the approach, how people, companies are approaching insider threats and incident response. And are you seeing your clients, for example, working to prepare for further changes out in 2021 and beyond? Because some people are going back to the office. Some people are not, or staying home, or there's some hybrid of both, a couple days a week in, and now we're about to venture in, just going back to school. And for some, that's a whole different model as well. So what are you hearing out there? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, we hear a bit of change from our customers. I mean, largely internal, we have had to rethink everything as well. We used to bring people in, we would put them through kind of a week-long orientation with the company. Obviously, that would be incredibly painful over video, and so we're no longer doing that. But we are trying to give people kind of that culture feel as much as we can over video, whether we send them some stuff to their home and introduce them that way, and then have video programs that are a bit shortened. For us, tied to kind of that data loss perspective, certainly we think it's a higher risk in this period of time. And so we want to make sure that people that we bring on during this period feel connected to the company. And in terms of offboarding, we still want to make sure that we do all of the necessary things that we did when people were in the office. We do the same things even remotely. We struggle a little bit with this given COVID, and we've changed some practices. Some, we're always monitoring data up until the person leaves the organization. I also have the IT organization, and one of the things that we've tried doing is remote wiping of a laptop and then giving the individual the laptop. If we have to let somebody go or furlough somebody, we're sort of playing with some of those. There's a lot of obviously complications when, we don't necessarily want people sending physical devices to the office when we don't have anyone there. And so we've played around with that and we've tweaked that. But for us and for the customers that I've talked to, their onboarding, offboarding processes have largely stayed the same. With the exception of just doing everything we can to make it remote versus in the office type feel.
Well, thank you. And so, Frank, I'm going to kind of shift to you. We've been hearing it, our different ISE cocktails and conversations and some of our other ISE Fireside webinars that people have a false sense of security working at home in that they're in their home environment. So, they're with their own devices and just sort of in a comfortable setting, as opposed to being in the workplace where they think Big Brother is watching them. The reality is, it's the same, across the board. But how is your security team focusing on protecting and the most valuable and most vulnerable of information out there? And do you think in this time frame, is it really possible to get true security visibility into the data, overall, that the employees are having access to in this kind of hybrid work environment, work from home, sometimes in the office environment? What are your thoughts on that?
So it's funny you asked that question, because last week when I was presenting to the board, one of our board members asked, how are we continuing to improve monitoring without making our employees feel like we were affecting their privacy, even if they were working off of our own systems? So Maximus, the largest part of our business and the largest part of our employee base, work out of call centers. And our call centers, part of our security model is built around the physical security provided by the call centers, especially some of the more stringent ones that we operate for the federal government. Employees are not allowed to take mobile devices that have, especially with those with cameras, into the enclave. They're not allowed, and they're checked that they're not coming out with papers, walking outside the environment. So this has been a real significant shift for us. And of course, we did have to send all those people home. The customer accepted that there was going to be some additional risk associated with it. And so, that's the one thing we've always said, and we've been very clear with our customers, is that we can't control that aspect any longer. We can't prevent someone from taking a picture of a screen. We can't prevent them from writing down information while they're on the phone, things that we prevented internally. Otherwise, that we are looking at, and as I mentioned, some of the things that we implemented earlier, it require desktop encryption. So that way, if we do run into a case, which we have already, where somebody's computer was stolen, or was taken out of their car while they were on their way home or while they were relocating, we can assure that no one would be able to get into and access the hard drive on that system. So any PII was, or any data at all, was protected. We did also require, as systems are going out the door, we did run data loss prevention discovery scans. And, it was kind of interesting for us. It was the first time we did it. As I mentioned before, we were in the middle of just deploying it, or actually, I shouldn't say the middle, we were in the early phases of deploying it. We ran discovery scans and found, well, there wasn't a lot of stored PII or PHI on those systems. There was a lot of residue left behind, since a lot of the applications are web-based. But again, as we look to so we're sort of maturing those technologies that we had already put in place quickly, but now we're looking towards, as we, especially, we're a few months out from our new fiscal year, part of our plan is going to be looking at user behavioral analysis, so we can look at alternative ways to improve those controls. We also, as part of our roadmap later this year, we're planning to start a more formalized insider threat program, but we're going to get that started. And we're looking at, more from a user-centric approach. How do we take and sort of put our employees into more of a role-based model? So we do have specific roles that are going to need more stricter controls placed on them, versus others that are more of our professional staff, our back office staff, that don't require those controls. Lastly, I think it's also sort of driving our approach to how we're doing data loss prevention. When we first started this, there was a lot of questions around, well, we should block people. We just block them outright. We're actually trying to take a different approach where, again, we can continue monitoring them, but without pushing, them feel like their privacy is being violated. And we're using more of a notification approach and saying, well, you're not allowed to take that action, or this action isn't recommended. How do you want to proceed? We're hoping that also works with us to change those behaviors, and then, as you said, not really make them feel like their privacy is being violated.
So sort of some security awareness, intuitive security awareness sort of built into the processes there, so that they're making some better decision making on their own versus blocking them all together. I think that's really a great idea. Cindy, how are you detecting and preventing data from leaving your organization? And have you found any obstacles, overall with your business structure in doing so?
Oh, and actually, going back to the onboarding and offboarding, so we had a slightly different perspective on that. So from the device perspective, we had in place the HR has a process for remote users, since we did have some use of remote users, and so we had that process in place. And then, much like JD was talking about, that being able to remote wipe or sanitize the devices and either send them back or allow the employee to keep the device. But what I think was even more interesting was from the identity and access management perspective was the furloughed employees, because we have many applications that are SOX impacted, and so we have a fairly strong compliance program, and so we had to come up with a process for how to manage the furloughed employees. And in some areas you would have a different definition for how a furloughed employee is managed and how it's so that, because like one case we had one country, it meant you could work you could work 1 day a week, but yet in other states you would be out of not working for 3 months or longer. And so no, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Finish your thought.
So the management of the device, the access to the network, things like that became a big challenge, and we basically had to adjust within the AD in order to be able to come up with a process and then make the exceptions where necessary for these furloughed staff.
Well, that brings up the next point for our transition to our next topic, Cindy. Perfect segue. So, the productivity and security, they're really hand in hand. And as we've seen across the board, security breaches and security nefarious activities actually is going up and taking advantage of the COVID-19 and remote workforce and the different processes. We've even seen security awareness where the organizations had really, really good programs in place. Everyone was very good on their hygiene and was very thoughtful, but now the table's been reset. So there's a lot of things going on that are very different out there. And as you talked about a little bit, Cindy, the shift with the folks working a few days a week or 1 day a week and then coming back in and popping back out. We've seen this with, some other industries across the board. So, maybe you could just speak to us a little bit about the remote shift and the risk tolerance, around insider threats as you're dealing with these flexible kind of work schedules or boarding and offboarding different employees, or they're on furlough, and what kind of processes might have you had to put in place, and is there any differences from what it was before?
So actually, it's a very interesting space, because I was on a call today where we were talking about the sites that are essentially vacant, and the potential risk in those sites of having your polycom still being on, so how do you manage the risk associated with an environment in which there may be the need to patch environments, or there may be just simply things on that are not being utilized. And so there's a lot of, I think, very subtle risks that we don't even think about until you actually get into the day-to-day operations of managing risk. So from our perspective, I don't believe we've actually changed our risk tolerance. It's the top, we're fairly intolerant to risk, and are actively working to maintain a strong level of from a security perspective, and then also bringing in the various organizations, you know, the legal, the procurement, privacy, to make sure that that it's being addressed from the multiple perspectives, and not just the security, so that we have a strong collaboration across the various organizations.
So, Frank, you know, is your security staff really helping or hindering your security team right now from performing their task, excuse me, with confidence? And do you feel like, you know, you talked about downstream that you have some more plans in place. What kind of, you know, problems do you think you're going to be solving, you know, with these types of plans that you have on the horizon?
Okay. Well, for us, the majority of our staff on our security team was remote. I had very small number, about 5 located here in Reston that work with me. The rest of the staff teleworked, occasionally visited our offices. So for us, it wasn't a major shift to move. To move the entire team to telework. I did notice, just the folks that worked in offices were there for a reason, and they like that collaboration. So we've been pushing more and more collaborative activities with the team. I think even more so than we had done in the past, just because I was seeing, even though, with people that just couldn't leave their homes, were feeling more disconnected. So I don't think we really lost a step, fortunately, because we were all remotely working. I mean, we did have to shift some timelines around, but by and large, the strategic projects that I had on my roadmap and that we had moving forward, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 that took a small delay and shifting the schedule, everything continued to stay on track. So I was really proud of my team and the work that they did. And we've continued to move forward. I think as we look to the future, again, I think we already had a lot of these solutions, mentioned, several times user behavioral analysis. Those were already things that we were kind of looking at for the future anyway, and we're on our roadmap for next year. I mean, it was all sort of part of that direction of being able to improve our ability to monitor and prevent against insider risks. So, so I think we were really already moving in that direction, and I think that this sort of helped reinforce that we were already moving in that. We already had a good plan laid out, so we weren't making any significant shifts at this point. Like I said, really, I think the only thing is we're looking at that really came out of this was a lot of the older solutions we had in place were set up to be location based rather than user based. So just as an example, and a very simple one, as users were moving out of the offices, they lost all of their web filtering, and so that had to shift because it was all location based. So we're looking at, if we ever have to deal with this in the future, how do we push more of those controls to the endpoint where they can follow the user no matter where they're working.
So Frank, you mentioned this before, that there was a little bit of concern from your board about the privacy aspects and enacting enterprise security there. JD, have you heard that from your clients as well? And how can we really encourage employee collaboration without feeling negatively impacting security and productivity, but having that protection in place? I'm going to have you close out with that as our final thoughts before we shift gears to our Q&A.
Sure. So in terms of productivity, I mean, that's one thing that I love about Code 42 is we very much believe in enabling the company to do what the company needs to do. It was fun when I started at Code 42, we put together kind of a team brand statement, like what do we want to be known for? And one of the things that my leaders really wanted to be known for was saying yes. Like instead of kind of the traditional security approach of always saying no, we really wanted to say yes and get to a yes answer whenever we could, or to get to here's a great option for you, and to continue to support productivity across our organization. I think sometimes as security leaders, we forget that that's part of our job as a support organization. And so, we did a lot to get to that point. The desire to help kind of the company be productive stems from a place of having empathy for what different business units are going through. And so in order to do that, we truly took time to understand what users needed, what they were going through. We work a lot with developers, and so we even learned some of the development principles ourselves. And so truly understanding like how users needed to work, and then trying to figure out different ways to securely support that productivity was kind of our #1 mission. I think that, you know, from a security perspective, that's kind of a core portion of our job, is to keep our users productive and keep them productive in a secure way. And most people in security would tell you too, if we don't do that, our users are creative and they're smart, and they'll find ways around us just to get to that point where they can truly be productive.
Thanks, JD. So we've got some really good questions from our audience today. So actually, the first one I'm going to gear back towards you, and it's from Todd Fitzgerald. How did you manage the processes that required printing at home? And we've heard over and over again on so many of our sessions, the printing at home part was hair-raising. Like it gave a lot of people, you know, the cliche, what keeps you up at night, and most security people are like nothing anymore, you know, but that was one of them, especially like in healthcare and financial services, where there's some real regulatory things happening.
Most security people are like, nothing keeps me up at night because I'm just up all night, every night. Yeah, the printing one is interesting, and it kind of goes, so the way that we solve it goes to kind of our general philosophy, where we want to make sure that we're giving the security team and the analysts visibility to everything. So I mentioned before, visibility to all things that go to USB, visibility to all things that get uploaded to a personal Dropbox. This includes like visibility to all things that are also printed. We're not going to block you from printing something, but what my team does is if they see a leader printing, you know, our strategic roadmap at home, or, you know, really important financials, they reach directly out. They do it in a very assume positive intent way, but they reach out and they understand kind of what was the intent around printing all the data. And then they do what security analysts are incredibly good at doing. They make a determination whether or not they feel like that's malicious and has to be escalated, or if it truly is kind of a business process and the risk is lower.
Well, thank you. That's a really good answer there. We also, we have from Les McCullum, how are your various organizations handling security best practices for your remote workforce and securing home routers and configurations? We've heard a lot, like the Alexa and all the things that are happening in your house are recording you or monitoring you. And we've heard over and over again that, you know, the routers are just, people have a password for goodness sakes, you know, at their home systems. Frank, did you encounter that? I mean, you've got all your folks working from home. What did you guys do?
We did address the employees' security of their network. I mean, we're having enough challenges with just some people, you know, having their own computer at home and figuring out how to connect it to Wi-Fi. But we did put a requirement in place, you know, that if we had any project that was handling PII or PHI, most of them we drove to virtual desktop. So we kept them all contained within that environment. In those rare cases where we didn't, where they couldn't use virtual desktop or they wanted to be able to work off their computers, we required them that they had to be on VPN before they were handling any of our sensitive customer data. So that's how we handle it. So far, we've not, you know, identified any issues or incidents from it, but we didn't really. I'd say there's probably better ways to have handled it, but that was sort of our quick solution when we had, you know, thousands of people that have never worked from home be able to securely do it.
Okay, well, that's a good one. This is from Amir Samolsi. How have you addressed the potentially higher level of risk introduced by third-party supply resources having to work remotely? Does anyone want to jump in on that one? JD, do you want to tackle that one?
Sure, sorry about that. I was on mute for a second. So I think I might have just typed an answer for that one.
Oh, okay.
So this is the third party supplier risk. Is this
Yes.
that one? Yeah. I guess third party management for security professionals has always been incredibly difficult. We can have the best, most robust process related to vendor security management, and still it's going to fall down because there's third party and fourth party and fifth party that we'll never really have full visibility to. And so, for us, we make sure that we have like the right agreements in place. We understand that some of our supplier resources would have to work remotely, and kind of to Frank's point, we're very focused on like getting security insights via the endpoint, no longer worrying about or relying on what we used to see related to network, and trying to get all of our insights based on tooling we have on the endpoint itself.
Thank you very much. This question's for, oh, go ahead, Sydney.
Oh, I was just going to add a little bit on the third-party supplier side. So we did find that a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot, that we have a fairly robust third-party supplier process where organizations are to get the supplier approved and the product approved prior to rolling it out, and that it became more challenging to get them to get the approval before they actually installed the software. So we had to do a little catch up on making sure that everything that's in the environment is an approved thing. So it's a slightly different issue.
Okay. Our next question is from an anonymous attendee, but this is geared towards you, Frank. Mm-hmm. Do your customers and maybe their contracts have a way have a way to say when your teams go back into the office? And are you receiving any kind of pressure to go back sooner? And do you feel comfortable with that? That's an interesting question, actually.
Yeah, it is, and we actually have a working group internally working to address this and looking long term. I guess to answer the first part of the question is, do the customers have a say? Absolutely. They had a say in when we left the office. They had a say when we went back. Those first few weeks, I know it was chaotic for all of us, but I mean, we had it really chaotic because I think we're active in, we have offices in 30 different states and multiple counties within the state. So we were finding that, as we were prioritizing one state or, or several states, one day, the next day we come in and the urgency would shift for another state. So the customers absolutely had to agree. Again, a lot of our, these businesses are call centers or businesses that we were not allowed to take any of that data, take any of the computers outside of the office. So our customers had to be on board with what we were doing, with our practices. I will say there's at least 2 call centers that come to mind that are so secure that there was absolutely no chance at all where they were ever going to let us work outside of the office. And then, of course, they made that shift and we had to work outside the office. So, we had to go present models where we either let them telework and we had to demonstrate why telework was going to continue to be secure, or we had to shift to a model where we worked 50-50 shifts to enforce social distancing. As far as going back to the offices, we are looking to our customers to help guide that right now. I would say we're not, we don't have any set date in mind. I think it's all going to be driven by what's acceptable. We do have a chief medical officer on staff, and he is helping monitor the situation and drive that decision when we go back. But ultimately, I would say that, the one thing I would say, yes, the customers are going to drive that decision largely, but leadership has said, they will step in and of course have to work with our customers closely if we feel that we're being pressured to do so, that in a point that it's going to put employees' health at risk. So I would say, so far, no, I've not heard of one single customer that's pushing pressure on us to go back into the office, but we did say that, we're going to make sure that we do it, and it's going to have to be a joint decision where we're not putting anyone's life or health at risk.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. That was a very insightful answer. I'm sure a lot of us are kind of curious about that from our different industries and stakeholders and employees out there. I just want to say thank you to all of you for a great discussion today. Oh my God, it went by really quick and I thought we had a lot of fun. Did you guys have fun?
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
All right, well, good deal. I want to encourage all of you to fill out the survey. We'd love your feedback about today's program, and it is in the chat window, and there's a link there. And if you do need CP credits, make sure you enter your information so that we can send you the proper paperwork for you to upload that information. If you'd like to stay in touch with us and learn more about Code 42, JD has her contact information out there. We'll encourage you to get in touch with her. And overall, we had a great time today. And I just want to wish everybody a happy July 4th and enjoy maybe some fun in the sun or whatever activities that you like to do in celebrating our nation's birthday. Thank you very much for joining us today. And a very special thank you to Code 42 for being our sponsor. Frank and Cindy and JD, again, thank you for sharing your knowledge with all of us. We really appreciate it. And all of you at home, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you and making the time to join us for our ISE Fireside webinar. We'll be in touch with some other upcoming programs in the month of July and onwards, and we look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Have a good afternoon.
You too, Marcy. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.